How many people in the room here have incorporated companies or worked in that kind of administrating a corporate environment before? All right, so you know what I'm going to be doing here is a little bit of a corporate structure for from the very, very, very basic. Corporate structure for dummies, corporate structure 101, you pick your level. So some of it may be repetitive, and then from there we're going to move on, and I'll get to that. We're going to try to cover in about an hour these few items that are here, which is, as I said, just talking about what is a company, what the roles mean within a company. We're then going to talk a little bit about founder shares, how we get a financing plan in place, how we might go about finding some of that initial capital, talk a little bit about stock options, and then take a look at what a cap table might look like for your startup company. So some of these slides are as complicated as this one. I don't send out a deck in advance because they're just way too explanatory in and of themselves. Your company starts with one person usually, an idea. It's you, and you have an awful lot of roles to cover off in the company. But we talk about a person, and we want to know how is one person going to end up getting their business idea to fruition. We usually end up getting others involved, so we have more than one person. You're going to see as we go through this chart, little circles tend to mean individuals or human being type people. So here we have 3 or 4 different people. It might be your partner, it might be your advisor, it might be somebody with money, it might be a contractor. You deal with other people in order to further your ideas along. And so we found ways over the years, in order to figure out how to associate those people in the best way in order to make your ideas come about. So we've got proprietorships, we've got partnerships, limited partnerships, joint ventures, companies, different kinds of companies. These are all just different ways that human beings have come together in order to team up, in order to create a corporate venture. So we're really going to talk about corporations here and only corporations. And so we start out with this complex incorporation. And we create a new, for all practical purposes, a new person that we call your company. And you will see that you as the individual, you the human being, are outside of this box we call a corporation. Okay? We're going to talk a little bit more about why you want to do this in a few minutes, but it's important as we start to understand that your company is different than you. It's as different from you as I am from you, or as your partner is from you, in many, many, many similar ways. We can add different people to our corporation. Okay? And they are usually outside of what I'm going to call the box. Your shareholders own the company. And so your shareholders are the people up above the box, and that's going to be their role. We'll figure some of this out in a second. Okay? Within the box, we have all sorts of people that are part of the company inside the box. Okay? We have the D's, which are the directors. We have the O's, which are the officers. We have the E's, which are the employees. These are all titles and names and designations that you will have all heard, and they are part of that company inside the box. When we structure it together and when we start spelling it out, this is what every company looks like. Okay? Outside the box, we have your shareholders. Sometimes a shareholder, a human being shareholder, might hold their shares through a holding company or an investment vehicle or some other corporate entity. Inside the box, we have the directors, okay, who are the bosses of the officers, who are the bosses of the employees, but these are all corporate titles. And then you may also find outside the box these things that we call advisory panels, and there are different people inside the advisory panel. I am incorporated. As a lawyer, I practice through a corporation. This is my complicated life, okay, but it fits within exactly what we've been talking about. So you've got me up in the left-hand corner. I happen to have 5 kids, so they go from K1 to K5, and the W is the wife. So they all, that's what, for still having a wife, or it's, out at night yet again. So I hold through a family trust, and they own shares of my law corp. PLC is a professional law corporation. So the company is way down there, and that's what it looks like. You'll see when we try to figure out who's doing what within my context, that I am the only director, I am the only employee, I am the president, I am the shareholder, my wife is the secretary, and my kids are non-voting participating shareholders, okay, through the family trust. So this is all just my little company and the way that I make money from earning a living as a lawyer, and it ends up getting distributed up through the companies. So if you can imagine what a Microsoft looks like or what one of the larger companies looks like, and when you get your company going, this is what it's going to look like one way or the other. You may or may not have a family trust, but you're going to have a series of shareholders up there, and you're going to have a whole bunch of people playing these roles. Maybe only you off the start. So let's talk just a little bit about what these roles are. And we're going to start with the shareholders because that's the people who are ultimately going to put in the money and own this corporation. So anybody can be a shareholder. Okay, an individual or a partnership or a trust or any of these items. Okay, so there's no real restrictions on who can be a shareholder. And there's no limit on how many shareholders you can have. So you can have as many shareholders as you want. There are rules that govern the relationship of companies to their shareholders, and those rules do change once you have 50 shareholders. So you may have heard, or you may be under the perception that I can't have more than 50 shareholders in my company. That's not true. What's important is that you understand the rules change a little bit when you get there. And you can't just go out and let anybody become a shareholder. Again, there are rules on the eligibility of people to become shareholders, not as to who or what they are, but they need to be in a special relationship with you in order to be able to buy shares. And again, we'll talk about that in later slides. If you're concerned about going out and finding shareholders, you don't know who they are, or somebody wants to give you money and you don't know what to do about it, it's one of the few places where I really go see a lawyer before you start. And we'll, again, talk about that concept later on. The beauty of being a shareholder is as a shareholder, you have no liabilities for what happens within that company whatsoever. Okay? That's the corporate law. So you invest your money, you buy your shares, you're in it for $1,000, let's say, because you bought 1,000 shares, and that's the end of your liability, unless you have contractually agreed otherwise. So again, you own 1,000 shares of Microsoft. If Microsoft gets sued, you're not expecting to have to pay a share of that bill. Okay, if Microsoft defaults on its on a contract somewhere, you're not expecting that because you happen to own shares in Microsoft, you're going to have to pony up more money. That's no different in your own company. So when I talked about my little law corporation, what happens within that law corporation stays within that law corporation. And it's the same for your company. Now, people will be sitting there going, but, or at least you should be. And people enter into contracts all the time that change that rule. If my company or your company goes out to lease space tomorrow, okay, and you go and you enter into a long-term lease with somebody, they're not going to accept that promise from your company to pay. They're going to want you as the shareholder to guarantee it. That's where your liability comes up, is because you've signed a guarantee. You go to the bank for a line of credit for your company. The bank will lend the company money, but they want you to guarantee it. So if the company doesn't pay it back, you will. These aren't liabilities because you are a shareholder of a company. Those are liabilities and obligations because you have agreed to allow them to happen. Okay, make sense? By the way, I should have started by saying this is interactive, so don't let me go too long without questions or interruptions or whatever. And trust me, nothing is too stupid, and the chances are really, really good that if you don't understand something, you're not alone. So the shares that you hold in your company, again, are open to creative writing and open to your personal sculpting in order to make this company look like you want. So there are a variety of classes of shares that you can have, of which have different rights and restrictions and obligations. They can be voting, they can be non-voting. They can be participating, they can be non-participating. And when I talk about participating, I mean entitled to dividends, entitled to a share of the profit from the corporations. In addition to shares, you can have options, warrants, rights. These are all different types of securities that allow people to actively be a part of that company from the ownership level. So what's so cool about being a shareholder? Well, you have the exclusive right to elect directors. That's about it. Okay? You don't get to decide what goes on. You don't have the right to access the premises. You don't have the right to talk to the president of the company. You don't. You have the right to elect directors. You may, by contract, have what are called preemptive rights, meaning if the company is going to issue more shares in the future, that you have the first chance to buy shares so that you can maintain your percentage ownership of the company. The relationship between shareholders and the relationship between shareholders and the company itself are governed by a small series of stacks of paper. So they're governed by the articles or the bylaws of the company, and they're governed by the shareholders agreements. There is really nothing you can't put into the shareholders agreement in order to create the custom relationship that you are looking for, okay, on how you're going to run your company. If 3 of you are partners and one of your promises that you're going to wash the other guy's car every second Thursday, you write it into your contract and there it is. Your company requires you to wash the car every second Thursday. All right? You can be as creative and as open as you want to be. So the next guy's down. We've said that the shareholders get to elect the directors. So what's special about directors? Okay, directors are what I call the policy setters. Okay, they're elected by the shareholders, and only the shareholders can name the directors. But if there is a vacancy in the board, somebody retires, dies, gets thrown out, okay, that vacancy can be filled by the directors. Our legislation allows as well that if your articles say so, that you can add up to 1/3 of your number of directors as new directors during the year, and those are also filled by the directors themselves. You must have at least 1 director. A company cannot run without a director. In BC, we have no residency requirement on our directors, so our directors can be resident anywhere. Federal companies require a majority Canadian directors. Saskatchewan companies require you to have a Saskatchewan resident director, that kind of thing. But in BC, what you'll hear from me when we talk about where to incorporate is one of the most open and liberal jurisdictions for setting up companies.